Hello folks, this is an ultra basic knowledge video just about the parts of a watch and the common terminology, because sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. Anyway, no prizes for guessing that this is a watch, and I'll talk through the various bits of it and the correct naming conventions. First of all, we have the watch case. Now this is the bit that the movement goes inside. It's basically the largest part of the watch's structure. Here's an empty case. This one's made of steel. And inside there used to be a Seiko NH35 movement. Now the movement is part inside the watch that actually makes it go, and this is actually the movement that used to be inside this watch. This is a NH35 automatic movement. They call it an automatic movement because it's a mechanical watch, and it has this weight that goes round which winds the watch up as you're wearing it, so it automatically winds itself up as the watch is moved around. Movements can be like this, or they can be quartz, but they go inside the case. Now cases can be made of different materials. This one here is made of steel. This watch here has a titanium case. And this one here has a zinc alloy case with a chrome plating on it. Usually considered the cheapest, but you can also get watches like this one here that has a resin case. This case is made of a sort of plastic. Now there are also watches out there with something claiming to be bioceramic cases, which are plastic mixed with ceramic, and you get also ceramic cases. Now the various different materials have different characteristics. Steel is the most common, and well, it's not the most premium because you get gold cased watches and watches cased in other types of precious metal as well, but steel's considered a good one because it's stainless steel's durable, it's reasonably scratch resistant, it takes a good polish, and it's corrosion resistant. These ones here with the chrome plating can sometimes pit through action of the acids in your sweat, and it starts to sort of come apart and pit and look a bit unpleasant, but it lasts all right initially. Anyway, that's the case of the watch. Now this bit here on a dive watch goes round. It's called the bezel, but it's not only watches that have a bit that goes round that's called the bezel. This watch here also has a bezel. You see this bezel here which doesn't move around. And the bezel's really just the part that connects the crystal, which is the glass, or otherwise. In the case of this watch, it's not glass, it's a thing called a synthetic sapphire crystal, which is very scratch resistant. And it sort of holds it onto the case. So that's the bezel part of the watch. But for dive watches, which there's a lot of them on the market, these things go round and you can use them to measure elapsed time. So it's an elapsed time and bezel, but these movable bezels is only one type of bezel. The basic thing is that the bezel's the bit that holds the crystal onto the watch. Although in the case of these ones with the movable bezels, you can actually take them off and the crystal is attached straight into the casing. It's not held on by the bezel. That's more of the traditional way of holding the crystals on. This bezel here is a fluted bezel. Doesn't go round or anything, it just serves as sort of a structural part or sometimes decorative part of the watch. A fluted bezel catches the light quite nicely, or a smooth bezel. So anyway, there we are. The crystal in this watch is just glass. The crystal in this watch is a synthetic sapphire, and the crystal on this watch is acrylic. In other words, clear plastic. Now, one of the things about crystals is that sapphire crystals, like this one, are highly scratch resistant. Mineral glass crystals will take scratches. Incidentally, on some watches, Rolex watches and some others, the date window, which is in there, is covered by a thing called a cyclops, and this little lens is intended to magnify the date window to make it easier to see. But anyway, that's a feature of some crystals. They have a cyclops over the date window. The next bit I want to talk to you about is, you see this one here has a crystal with a cyclops in it. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the case back. Now, case backs go on watches in a number of different ways. This one screws in to make a nice tight seal, as does this one. In my opinion, that's the best way to manufacture a watch, and that's what you should be looking at as the gold standard. Now, some case backs have a window in them so that you can see the movement inside, but the crucial difference is whether the case back snaps on with pressure, a pressure fit, or it unscrews with a thread, and as you can see there, there's a gasket inside which helps with the water resistant. That's case backs. The other way of securing a case back, if you have a look at this Casio watch, is that there are screws holding the case back down. Inside there, there's also a gasket which is squeezed between the case back and the case, and that's where the water resistance comes from. Generally speaking, you have to remove the case back of a watch in order to access the movement for servicing, for replacement of batteries and quartz watches and things like that, but that's what case backs are all about. There are some watches, however, where you access the movement by removing the bezel and accessing it from the front, because they've got a fully integrated case that doesn't have a removable case back, but that's quite rare. Now, if we look at the dial itself, you can see that the analog hands on the dial there. Now, they come in a variety of different types. These ones are loomed. They call this particular type of shape a sword hand. This watch here, it also has loomed hands, but that shape is normally referred to as Dauphin hands. And these ones here, very common on your Rolex watches, well, your Rolex sports watches, and their homages are called Mercedes hands. Now, if you look at the hour hand, the end of the hour hand, it's quite self-evident why that is called a Mercedes hand. Watches that have handsets on them are referred to as analog watches, whereas watches like this one are referred to as digital watches. Now, you do get mechanical digital watches, but they're quite scarce. So usually you'll be talking about an LED or an LCD display on a digital watch, whereas an analog watch will have either a mechanical or a quartz movement turning hands. Now, the bit here is called the date window. Now, having date on a watch is something that's referred to as a complication. And complications are like this, well, the date windows are the simplest complication that you find on most watches. In fact, arguably seconds hands are also a complication. So you could say that a watch that has a two-hander, as we call them, like this one here, two-handers have no complications on them at all. But other watches that have a date window, inside the movement has a piece like this, which is called the date wheel, which clicks round once every 24 hours and shows in the little window there. That would be this one would be set to the 4th of whatever month it is, and that's basically what a date window. There are other watches that have additional complications. They have a day and a date, like this one here. You can see my video about how I hate when Sundays come out red on these things. But anyway, this one shows you the day of the week and the date of the month. Now we're having another close-up here on the dial of the watch, because what I want to talk to you about here are the markers that you tell the time with. Now these ones are called baton markers. You get some watches where actual numbers appear on the dial, like for example this one here, and these numbers are referred to usually as Arabic markers. You get others that have Roman numerals, it stands to reason what they are. But the types of markers are, you get applied markers like these ones, where the markers are little structures in of themselves that are attached onto the dial. And in the case of this watch, they are loomed, but sometimes they aren't loomed, sometimes they're just simply small metal bars. And these baton markers is one type. Another type of applied marker would be here. These ones here are a homage to the Rolex layout. These are also applied markers. You see that these are attached to the dial. You do get markers, however, that are not attached to the dial. They are actually printed directly onto the dial. This one here has printed, well, partial, some of them are batons, but Roman numerals on the dial. So these ones are not applied markers, these are printed markers, and that's what's meant by an applied marker as opposed to a printed marker. Now this watch that has printed markers on the dial doesn't have any means of you being able to read the watch at night, whereas this watch has a little button that you press and it turns on a backlight, and you actually have a little light that illuminates so you can read that at night. But there is another way of doing things, and you can have a watch like this watch that has luminous material applied to the dial, and they glow at night. You can actually get the entire face of the watch glowing, not the markers, the actual dial can be loomed as well, but that's a bit less common. That's what's meant by loom on a watch, and this is actually quite generously fills the Arabic markers there, whereas with this one it fills the applied markers. But as I said, not all markers are loomed at all, not all watches are loomed. It's a design choice on the part of the makers. The next part of the watch that I want to talk about is this part here. Now sometimes we call this the winder, but the correct name for this part here is the crown. Now the crown of the watch is the part of the watch, the component that we use to set the hands of the watch, or in the case of mechanical watches, to wind the movement mainspring up in order to generate the power to make the watch run. The crown is attached to a piece, to a long sort of piece called the stem. You can see when I pull it out there to its first position, you can see a bit of the stem, and here's a movement with the stem and crown attached. The stem pierces the case into the movement and enables you to set the watch and to wind the watch up. Now there are different designs of crown. Some are larger, some are smaller. Generally speaking, a nice knurling on the crown and a decent size is much easier to use than a very tiny crown as you get on some watches. But the configuration of the crown tends to be a design choice, but that's what that component's called. It's not really correctly referred to as the winder, it is the crown of the watch. Now this one here is exposed and just sticks out from the side of the watch, but on this watch here you can see that there are protuberances from the case side, and what these do is they protect the crown, and these are called crown guards. Not all watches have them, it is a design choice. Crown guards are a sort of variable design element within watches. But these are crown guards, and this is the crown. Now, if we look here at this watch, we can see that it has these bits here. Now, this is where the strap attaches to the watch, and these are called lugs. Now, most watches have lugs of some description, and the space between the lugs is called the lug width. Now, the lug width is quite crucial to know, because if you want to get another bracelet for the watch or another strap, you need to know how wide the lug width is. In between the lugs, we have this thing here. This is called a spring bar. This is actually quite a good chunky spring bar. And the spring bar fits inside these little holes here. There's a spring in the middle and two little sockets on the end, and it's a tube. And what happens is you compress the spring in the middle to get the little sockets to click into place in the little holes that are on the lug, and they'll either go through the strap, as in the case of this one, or with some straps you can thread them through here, like NATO straps, etc., which I'll go into in a little bit in the last half of the video, the last part of the video. But this is what spring bars look like, and that's what's meant by a spring bar. Now, some watches, especially at the cheaper end of the market, like this one did, came with really crappy thin spring bars, and if the spring bar breaks and your watch isn't attached to a NATO type strap, if your watch is attached to a sort of standard leather watch strap or some other watch strap like that, spring bar breaks, the watch will come away and fall off your wrist, and you could lose your watch, which is one of the reasons why NATO straps, as they're called, are very popular with field watches, military watches that are basically designed for for tough use outdoors in hostile environments, so that they don't lose their watch if they snag it on a tree or such like. Okay. Now, watch straps. This here is quite a traditional type of watch strap, and the earliest wristwatches generally had a strap like this, and it would be two pieces of leather which fitted over the lugs. Sometimes they were made, they would actually fold over the lug and then be fastened, because the lugs were fixed to, the lugs had spring bars that were fixed across them. They had sort of fixed lugs that were just loops basically on the side of the watch. That's the early wristwatches. But in general, you're talking about two pieces of leather attached via the spring bars to the lugs of the watch, and then a watch strap. And they can be made of leather, sometimes canvas, sometimes silicone rubber, sometimes plastic, all sorts of materials really. But that's really what we mean by a strap, rather than this, which is a bracelet. And generally speaking, when a watch has a metal bracelet on it, the bracelet can come in different types, but a metal one tends to be called a bracelet rather than a strap. This one is a very common type of bracelet. It consists of basically three pieces, 1, 2, 3 on the links, and this one is generally what they call an oyster style bracelet. Now, oyster style bracelets are what comes with, well, generally speaking, things like Rolex Submariners and things like that. But oyster style bracelets are very ubiquitous now. But that's what's meant by that sort of shape of 3-link bracelet, or sometimes they're single links that are made to look like 3 links, but this is an oyster style bracelet. There are other styles of bracelet. There's actually far too many to go into any great detail about, but common ones would be your oyster style bracelet. This style of bracelet here, where there are more links and there's a lot more articulation, this is called a Jubilee bracelet. Incidentally, this one is Milanese mesh bracelet. These are actually quite popular as well. They articulate through the chainmail, basically, they're made of. And they're actually quite a popular and classic choice as well with watches. But there's a huge and infinite variety of bracelet types. You see here this integral bracelet, integral because it's attached, it's part of the watch's design, and that's made of titanium, and these are all folded. Now another part of this is the actual links themselves on this watch are solid, and generally speaking it's a mark of quality to have solid links on your bracelet and solid end links, the bit where it joins on to the space between the lugs. But yeah, solid links are very good. Cheaper watches tend to have folded links. Now you see this actually looks like an oyster bracelet, but it's just made of pieces of folded metal. Really quite complex to manufacture these, but there's less steel involved in this than in this one here. So that's the difference there. That's a folded steel bracelet as opposed to a solid link bracelet. Now I mentioned military watches and NATO straps, so I thought I'd show you what a NATO strap is. Now NATOs are not the only sort of pull-through strap that comes in one piece, not a two-piece strap, but NATOs are quite common and quite popular ones here, and this is a NATO strap here. Now you see this is made of a piece of nylon. They're not exactly waterproof, but they are undamaged by water and they dry out quite quickly, so they're quite useful for military use in bad environments. And what you do is you have these sections of it, yeah, you see how it's stitched together like this, and this part here goes through the lugs of the watch like this, and up through there. You pull the watch down towards the buckle and thread it through that part there. Now you have a watch strap, the point of which is if one of your spring bars fails, the watch will still be attached to the strap around your wrist and you won't lose it. Not all watches have lugs and detachable bracelets. Some, like this titanium one, have integrated bracelets, and these are actually quite common and quite popular. Nowadays there's been a bit of a resurgence with these watches with the integrated bracelets. Now they can look extremely attractive, they can be really, really good, but the disadvantage of this is if you get a watch that has an integrated bracelet, you can't, well, usually can't at all get replacement bracelets for them or change about the look of them. You're stuck with the one that comes with it, so you sort of better make sure you kind of like it. Well folks, apologies, it's quite a shallow dive into the subject. It's quite a big subject. This is just for beginners. An awful lot of people, well, anybody who got this far probably appreciated the pointers, I'll put it that way. Anybody who didn't get this far probably said, I know all this. But when I started out, I thought the crystal of a watch was something to do with digital LCD watches, liquid crystal display. Didn't really understand that it's actually a bit more universal than that. So knowledge is only a good thing. Till the next time, bye bye for now. To like, comment and subscribe, Hamish. Good boy.